Buenos dias, Lizeth. How are you? Lizbeth.
Doing good.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Lizbeth. Yo siempre ando bautizando a la
If
gente,
you
girl.
want, people call me, I go by Liz too, for the
Uh-huh.
same reason, but I think it's Liz, Lizbeth, whichever works.
I mean, it's a beautiful name, Lizbeth. Doctora Lizbeth, welcome. Welcome to Embracing My
Oh, thank you.
Markings.
Thank you for
Um,
the invitation.
Girl, so right now you were telling me you're in New York time right now.
Yeah, New York.
Girl, what are you
Yeah.
doing in New
So this,
York? You can never be in one place. Wait. Before we even get started, let people know where they can find you on social media.
yeah, they could find me, for example, on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. I have the same handle for all of them as Lizbeth de Santana.
Perfect. And you guys, super easy to find her. I found her on TikTok. Please go and follow her. She does amazing work and she shares very important videos, especially for those of us that are first generation here in the States. So, but okay, girl, what are you doing in New York?
I think like growing up, I never imagined myself on this side of the US ever. Maybe on a trip, but never to live or like to move here for work. And when I recently finished my PhD program at UC Davis, and when I was on the job search, I kind of stayed away from jobs from the East Coast because I was like, you know what? Like, I've always been that girl who's like very close to her family, very centered on her community. And this just seemed kind of like a fantasy, right? Like not a dream because it was never my dream. It was never in my plans, never on my vision board, none of that. But I ended up being here. And I think for me, I remember when I had these options laid out, I was like, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be the option that I least think of, right? The one that I'm not even considering as much. I did the interviews, the whole process, and for me, it was just so simple and easy, like a good, like I fit in really well, but my heart was somewhere else, right? Like I wanted to stay in California,
Yeah.
but things ended up working for me to come here, and I'm thankful now that I'm here because it was not ever like in my plans.
Now, right now that you're saying that, I'm wondering if it's because we grew up. Did you grow up in California?
Yeah, in California. Yeah.
Okay, so
LA,
yeah, okay,
Fresno.
yes,
Yeah.
girl. I'm an
Yeah.
LA girly too. Um, but so I currently I'm in San Diego, but
Okay.
I was born in LA, and I was raised here in San Diego, but I still till this day I have family in LA. We lived there
Mhm.
for several years. But I feel like there's something about us growing up that just the East Coast is just not it, girl.
No, and I could tell you like my advisors or professors that, they were, keeping track of what I was doing and, me informing them about the job search and the interviews and how the campus visits went. And they would always tell me, the snow, like beware of the snow. It's so cold for us out there. But now that I'm here, I mean, I did leave during December, so I think that's the reason why I'm not hating it, right? But I think it's just this idea of like leaving, and I'm also the firstborn in my parents' like family dynamic. So being the first daughter, it's also like I think when I told my sister and I texted my family on my way to the airport when I made my decision, I was like, so I'm gonna choose New York. And I think for everyone it was shocking, right? To say, why does she want to leave? And it's not because I wanted to leave. I think it's ingrained in us, right? Like my parents came to the US. My dad was also the first in his family to come to the US from Mexico. And I think I always had that in the back, of my mind of like, it's possible because my dad did it,
Yeah.
and he didn't get this education that I was now able to gain, but it was just like las ganas, or like the desire or the need to do so.
Yes, yes. I think about that all the time, and I've actually had my dad on this podcast before
Oh, nice.
talk
That's
about his
beautiful.
experience as a migrant. Cause girl, I'm like, you guys did not have Google back then. My parents
No,
migrated in the 70s,
nothing. Yeah.
and I'm like, how did you guys know like where to go, how to look for housing? You guys don't know the language, like tienes que tener unos cajones bien grandotes para
Yeah.
poder hacer eso. Like, how did you know? And he's like, I would just ask and I would
Mhm.
look and I would see, and I'm like, shh. And we put
Yeah,
up excuses over here when we got everything, girl.
yeah, or like we have it better in some capacity, right? And like you said, resources or connections, the same thing, right? It's a thing admirable to think about our parents' migration stories and how they made it happen and what we can do now with what we have. I think that's where we're always meant to do better. That's why there's this reason of like you should do better than the previous generation, whatever that better looks like, but to not stay stagnant because our parents never did.
Yes. And I firmly believe that because, yeah, maybe our parents didn't have all the tools and their parents didn't have all the tools, but you have to leave something still better. And so I even tell my son, I have a soon to be 16-year-old.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
And y siempre le digo, I'm like, you know what? I want you to not have to struggle because we were passed down the struggle. And so even us todavía tenemos esos, traumas, and unless we go to school and educate ourselves and maybe look into the things to better ourselves, many of us have, money fears, being at a job for, 40 years and being happy with that. Not traveling, no gastar dinero, no esto, because our parents' mentality. And so I said, but I'm letting you go of that mentality. And you don't understand how powerful it is for me to raise you, giving you all the tools that there's here. Porque a mí, no, desafortunadamente, mis papás no sabían mucho of cómo era el sistema aquí en los Estados Unidos. So I went to community college. But my younger brother was able to do something even better than I. He actually went to university.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's how it's supposed to be. So I told my son, you're going to be even better than that, And le dije, and all I want you to just know is that you're receiving tools that none of us had.
Yeah. And then you would think about, right? It's like, then what else can we pass down besides the tools, right? So it's the lessons, right? Because unfortunately, even for the next generation coming forward, right? So eventually, your son or my kids eventually in the future, they're going to face different obstacles, right? So I think seeing us, I don't want to say endure is the best word, but face these with like bravery or just saying, you know what, regardless of how this looks like right now, I'm going to get through it, right? Like
Yes.
it's get done or and it's lessons that I think those the lessons that we do want to keep from our grandparents, right? Like our parents are those of like regardless of the obstacles, the structural barriers that they face in the US, like they still did it. Like I
Yes.
think of my mom still to today, like when I was in Fresno during December, I was every time I go, I mean, I can't work on my stuff because first of all, like I see my family and then I'm like, okay, well, I'm here for a while. I shouldn't work as much as I do when I'm not home because this is my family time, right? So just connecting and not adding more to my plate. But this is my time also to help my mom understand like the legal language and her documents, right? Like documents that she's processing or like she has her cleaning company. So for me, it's kind of funny. Like I went to Wells Fargo with her and, they ask her like, what's your title? And I'm like, oh yeah, she's a CEO, but she doesn't see herself as that, but I think it's just the fact of like she's a business owner doing the work behind it, right? Like she has X amount of experience and she came to the US, right, working in her field. So I think it's just important to like to demystify the fact that if you're a CEO or someone who has like a business, you need to look a certain way, right? Like we all have different profiles and we show up in the world differently. And it's just the power of like you being yourself, which I think helps people stay authentic and people like that too.
Yes, 100%. Oh my God. And so your mom till this day, she doesn't see herself as a CEO? Una
No, and it's
mujerón.
so funny because I asked her, right? Because like I was translating for her, because again, like access to Spanish, right? And even if they do understand some English, like it's not available all the time, right? Like you have
Yeah,
to
no.
wait extra time, like 2 weeks more. And I'm like, we don't have that time, right? So I think for me, it's just in asking her, so what's your title, right? And I gave her the options listed, and she kind of said it like more timid, like CEO, like, can I really say that? And for me, it's like, yeah, you can because you are, right? Like you're paying,
Yes.
doing the work. Like, why can't you own up for that to that name or title?
Oh my God. I almost también always think about, and this is one of the things that I asked my dad is like, imagine having to leave your hometown. Like you had the option, right? You said, I'm choosing
Yeah.
New York.
Mhm.
But them not having the option and having to leave everything that they know for something
Exactly.
that's a huge unknown, a darkness. Oh my God, the anxiety, girl. Yo con mi anxiety.
No, and thinking about it too, right? Like in my case, I had like a job lined up, right? And I think for them, even if they had connections of saying, like at least in my parents' experience, like my dad, it was like cleaning offices as soon as he got here, right? Or working in el campo. So I think it's just this idea of like how things line up for you, like who's there to back you up. And in their case, they had like an uncle, at least in my dad's case. My mom had her siblings who were here. But in my case, I think about I'm like, okay, well, I study migration, right? Like I understand how it is for people who don't have a status, right? Who are undocumented, like full on undocumented, no DACA, nothing like that. If they manage to do it, right, with like the lack of this legal paper that gives them the option to work or be legally recognized, then why can I do it? Right? Like what's gonna be my struggle then? Right. So it's not homesickness because I'm not homesick because I'm so worked, right? Like I'm working constantly. So for me, it's just kind of I think how things lined up allowed me to kind of like grow a stronger character in that sense. And going and having the option, like you said, to go back home during the breaks.
Yes.
And that was my way of consolidating this and also making it easier for my parents. Yeah.
Oh, most definitely. Now, I kind of want to start talking about, girl, when you were growing up, the little girl in Los Angeles. What part of LA are you from?
So I grew up in Compton, California, went to school in Linwood,
Oh my
but I
goodness,
was
girl.
in Torrance. I've been everywhere, like little pockets here and there, but Compton was like,
You're
I mean, I had
home.
my quinceañera there.
Oh my god. Oh, girl. No, you're that little piece of your heart is there.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, as a little girl, what were your aspirations, your dreams?
Yeah, I feel like I don't know, I think like my parents never pushed me to go to school because I think for them it was just we were good kids. I think they were very fortunate that we weren't like, troublemakers, anything like that. And I think because we would go with them to work, right? So when we were younger, we had babysitters here and there, but they were horrible. Like that's just I think that was the only like traumatic part of my childhood, right? Like the care or the lack of care we had from like, these babysitters, which, but I think for me, it was just like the fact that we would always tell my parents, like, just take us with you to work, right? Especially on weekends or at night. And I think that helped build like this strong like work ethic for us. Because I mean, we're little and what could we do? Either sit around or help take out the trash, right? Or just look around the cubicles, like offices and things like that. So growing up, I would be exposed to this, right? Or houses that I was just like, wow, this is a beautiful home, right? Or talking to the owners. So I would see like women leaders, right, in their own respective fields. One of them, her name is Lisa Molina, and I still remember her because she ran her own, like back in the day, cassette company, right? So cassettes to be
Yes.
movies, right? And I think for me, that was like, wow, she's badass, right? Like she was like the man in the house. So for me, I was like, wow, that she's awesome, right? And so I think being exposed to that growing up for me allowed me to imagine like I could be whatever I want. I just need to figure out what that looks like, right? But again, you're in the school system in LA. You have, I mean, I grew up knowing that my middle school could be shut down at any moment because we weren't meeting state standards for testing. So it was just like
Wow.
drilled on us, right? You need to pass these exams, like everyone needs to pass because if not, we're gonna lose funding, the school's closing. So I had that fear on me, right? All the time of like, oh, we know we don't have access to like the best education, but what we have works, right? So again, like all of these little things, but I think meeting professors, I think that's where I ended up choosing Spanish as like my major in undergrad, master's, and PhD because those were the teachers that opened up my eyes to saying, if you want to be in education, right? Like a high school teacher, for example, which was my ambition back in the day, it was like, it's doable. Just follow these steps, right? But I mean, I had no one to look up to, right? Like there's no doctors, no like lawyers, no police or whatever, all these fields, that you grow up with people like telling you when you grow up, you're gonna be an astronaut, all these things. Like I didn't have that, but I was good at math, but I ended up choosing literature because I think back then going back and forth through like Guadalajara and then living in the US allowed me to see like there's a lot of power and value in being able to communicate with your family. And that's where I think it all just started like creating this domino effect to lead me to what my life is now.
Wow. So entonces, growing up, you saw the lack of representation. However,
Yeah.
you were able to see how other people were living
Yeah. Like
and
go
see
to
that maybe
fancy
that was an
homes, stuff
option.
like that. Yeah, fancy homes and stuff. Because I remember when we lived in San Pedro, that was like our first apartment when I was born in Torrance, but we lived in San Pedro, right by the fish market. So for us,
Oh
that was
yeah.
like, like I grew up there, so I'm very proud of that. But my mom used to cut hair back in the day, and the owner ended up becoming my madrina for my 15. But we would always like stop by their home, but it was a mansion in San Pedro. So I was like, who are like, I knew of them, I knew who they were like growing up, but I never, I was like, how do my parents know them? Right. But it was because my mom used to cut hair in her salon and just to kind of see like the life and like just and her husband was an immigrant, a Mexican immigrant who just became this huge sensation in his business. And I think for me that allowed me to see like if you really like put your efforts into it, you could become someone that can contribute to society. It doesn't always have to be money wise, but what you have to say will be valued by people. But you
Yeah.
need to have that foundation behind you.
Yes. But I think también, kind of what we were reverting back to, especially our parents, I feel like that generation is so humble that
Mhm. Oh,
for them, como dices, like your mommy not being able to say that she's CEO or not feeling comfortable
yeah.
saying that she's CEO,
Mhm.
because I feel like most of us también we carry that imposter syndrome. Do we really
Yeah.
belong? Because this is really not a place that welcomes you either. Um,
Yeah.
if anything, and that's one of the things when I was looking into, you studying Mexican American like studies and stuff, and having your doctorate on that. Dije, I've always liked that conversation because when I was in college, I took a course, the Mexican American history, and girl, I learned
Uh-huh.
so much. I didn't even
Yeah.
know like what were the proper terms for us first generations, learning all that. And I think it helped me understand también maybe where some of our older siblings are, right? I have a brother that's 11 years older than me and a sister that's 9 years older than me. And their experience here has been very different from mine.
Yeah. Hmm.
And, the lifestyle that they fell into, the lifestyle that was at that time that they had to survive in
Right. And available to them, right?
and
Like what
available
can you
to,
access? Yeah.
yes. And I never understood that before. I was like, why would they struggle? Like they're cool, and they weren't fat kids, they weren't skinny kids, they weren't short kids. Like,
Yeah.
why were you guys getting bullied? Well, because they didn't speak the language, because at home it was just Spanish.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then the school system in LA, like you said, you
Hmm.
don't have the best access to it either. So you're kind of like stuck.
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk to you about that. What, first of all, can you just like clarify what is the right term for first generations? Are we Chicanos, Latinos, Mexican American? What are we, girl?
So, I grew up knowing that I was Mexican American. right? And I was very, very proud. And I would make sure that the Mexican part would come first because that's just, like who I was. And I think it had to do a lot with my parents always taking us in August specifically to Guadalajara, like to my mom's rancho near Guadalajara and my dad's pueblo. So I think for me, I was very proud of our roots and speaking Spanish. Like I knew that I had access to two languages and I had the possibility of supporting my parents and understanding what their documents or helping them do their business invoices, right? Of like, okay, I know how to write numbers in English. Let me help you do this. So I knew there was a lot of things to be proud of, right? But again, being in I don't know if it's just LA exclusive, but I think just in our experiences, which I think there's a lot of echoes in there, right? It's either you become the nerdy kid or the kid that gets pulled into gang life or gets criminalized, right? So I noticed that right away. In my schools, in my middle school specifically, we ended up having uniforms enforced because we couldn't wear red or blue, right? Because those were
Yeah.
affiliated to gangs. Also, but I mean, we still did it, right? Like under our clothes, we had like a form of resistance, usually wearing red, right, or blue, depending on what you wanted to do. But we found ways of resistance, right? But I think later on, it was in college when I figured out and came to terms of who I was because Mexican American never really fully sat right with me because I knew that there was more of who I was, right? And I would always try to figure out like what is it? What is this missing identity that I have? So it was like a long search of like finding my place in the US because I knew I didn't fully belong here. And in Mexico, I mean, my family was always, warm to us and caring, but I knew I wasn't full on Mexican either, right? Because I had access to more privilege than they ever did.
Yeah.
And the fact that I had a passport, I think that's always something that allowed me to see that they knew that I could always come back and go. But it was, I think, for me, the moment that I realized as a kid, right? As the oldest, we were walking from our home in Bell Gardens because we used to go to Bell Gardens Elementary School. And I was pressing the button to cross the light. It was just a couple blocks from our home. So I was able to just take my siblings with me. And then this white man grabs my arm, right? Like my muñeca. That's why I learned the word muñeca too, like my arm. You see, like the little trauma things. But
Yes.
he grabs my hand. He's smoking a cigar. You're a kid. You don't think anything bad is gonna happen. So he grabs my hand, and I wasn't pressing it like being annoying. I pressed it like 2, 3 times so I could like turn for us to walk. And he grabs my hand and he like burns my hand with a cigar. And in that moment, I was shocked. I was like, wait, what's happening? Like, I couldn't cry because I think for me, it was like the moment of how do I react to this? Because it was my first time ever experiencing like a physical microaggression in that sense. So still to today, I have it, right? So I think for me, it's kind of a reminder that we do belong here legally, but it doesn't mean that society is going to like respect you or your body. And we see that with like right now with talks about like women's like body and like your rights, right? So I think for me, that was like the moment where I'm like, okay, you need to wake up because this is how life really is. And I think that's where life spiraled to see how the reality is, right? Of like why there's certain white people that hate towards or really do want Mexicans out of this country, not knowing the history right behind, especially in California, right, which was before part of Mexico. And I think not having like ethnic studies available to everyone allows people to remain ignorant, right, and
Yes.
really take on that through violence and not caring about children. So at that time, I think I was like second, third grade because my brother was already going with us to school. So I think for me, and I never told my parents, because I was like, what do I say? Like I still couldn't find the words to describe like
Well,
that specific thing.
I don't think your mind at that time, you were so young
Yeah, I was little. Like,
that you didn't even know how to process that because I couldn't the feeling that you're saying that you were like kind of shocked, you were trying to process what was going on and you didn't understand.
yeah.
Did you,
No, well,
so
that's
you
being
didn't
burned.
cry out, you didn't?
No, and you know what? Like, I think for me, it was like this moment of like proving to myself that I was strong enough, right? Because I already had the responsibility of like taking my brothers to school with me, right? So I already felt like grown up in some sense, right? Because I felt trust that my parents trusted me.
Yeah.
So when this happened, I remember that I never like took out like the ash from my hand. Like I let it sit there as I crossed the street, right? So I let it sit
Oh my
there
God, mujer.
and just by walking, like because I didn't want to alert my siblings either, right? They were little. So I was like, let me just walk to school. I'm almost there, and then I'll figure it out, right? So
And
it
and
just
the guy never said anything. Like,
no, he was like one of those like redneck white guys. I'm like, what is he
mm.
doing here in Mill Gardens? But they're everywhere. Yeah, but I do
Girl, but
remember how
just the
he
name
looked.
itself, California.
Yeah, it's in California. Democratic state, whatever you want to think. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be in the same like mindset. But
It's
again,
not.
I think it's very coward of people to do that too, right? So it just shows you how in history we've seen so many instances of genocides and massacres of people or deportations. So bringing it back to your question about like what should we be called, then I think in college that's where I figured out, like when I was doing my master's, right? Like I'm actually a Chicana. Yes, Mexican American, but I am a first gen, but also a Chicana. And the fact that I do recognize myself as a Chicana brings it back to the Movimiento Chicano, right? Of like understanding your history, the importance behind it, and also sharing that towards the next generations, but for fighting towards social justice and things that you really are passionate about. And that's where I found myself like, finally, I know who I am, right? And I remember it was my second semester in the master's, and I was like, I've always been a Chicana. I started learning more about who I was through Gloria and Saldua's Borderland. And I remember just going to the bookstore at Fresno State and looking for Spanish books that I needed for my major. And then I was like, let me browse around. And I found the Chicano studies books. And I was like, what is this? Right. And then I looked because it says Borderlands. I was like, what is that? And that's where I was like, wow, she's talking about me, right? And like this consciousness, double consciousness aspect as well that we would learn about W. Du Bois, but now through like a Chicano lens. And I was like, where has this been all my life? But being Chicana doesn't always mean that everyone's going to accept you,
Oh, of
right?
course
So I
not.
think also like telling people I'm from Compton, they're like, oh, there's something wrong with her, or there's just it gives people a certain idea of who you are, saying where you're from, right? And then say now I'm a Chicana, it's just kind of like it just has negative connotations at the end of the day for so many people who don't understand the history.
That is very
But
true.
be proud of it. Yeah. But I'm proud of it. I'm proud of who the Chicanos were back in the day and currently the ones who are like paving the way for us to like imagine ourselves as whatever we want to be.
Girl. So that's the beauty of it, right? When you are collecting stories of getting to know different people. And most of the, like I had the David. Oh my God, I forgot his full name. I'm so sorry, friend. But now he's a dear friend, but he was part of the team that did the Apple logo.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And he was born in Mexico City. And like he told us his story, y también llegó aquí sin nada, his parents and everything. And it's like the whole episode is like full circle, right? Because at first you're
Right.
like, what is he talking about? Because he's talking about his childhood, but how it ties and how his whole life just connected at the end for him.
Yeah.
Is amazing. Y lo que podemos hacer nosotros, right? A Mexican was the one that invented color TV. A Mexican was
Yeah.
the one that came up with birth control. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many things that Mexicans have done. And I feel like sometimes certain, como dices, even for me, girl, I grew up here, right? I know what it is to not be white enough to be accepted, but then in Mexico, you're not Mexican enough to be accepted
Right.
either. So, es lo mismo, right? Ni de aquí ni de allá.
Yeah.
But growing up, I didn't like the term Chicana.
Yeah. And that's totally fine because you know what? It was always shown to be something negative, right?
Yes,
It was always
yes.
like the rebel kids, las pachucas, the gangsters, el pachuco, las cholas, right? Like the hoops. I mean, we see it in style now, right? Because it became, white kind of thing, aesthetic. But back in the day, it was like, oh, those are the troublemaker kids.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so growing up, I was like, I am not Chicana. Like, I'm not a
Yeah.
Chola. Like, no, like, my family is
Yeah.
not gangster like that.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and then I went to school and I learned, and I was like, wow, there's so much kept from us that we don't even know
Mhm.
our own history.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And there's power in uncovering that history, right? Because then you start seeing the world through a whole different lens of saying, you know what, it's not bad to say that I am Mexican American, but it's even better to say that I'm a Chicana or Chicano or Chicanx now, right? Of saying like, because I come from a legacy of badass people. That's where we need
Yes.
to like focus on, right? Like thinking about our histories, right? Like our parents came here, but what about the people that came before them, right? So in my case, my grandparents were braceros who came and like helped feed this country and keep it, afloat, right? But what are the things that they get? Nothing, right? So I remember still until my grandpa passed away, they were dealing about the fact that the US government in Mexico stole money from them, right? From the braceros. They never gave them the full money that they needed to have received. So I think for me, it's like I grew up knowing like Mexicanos were always going to be mistreated as long as we let our governments, right, Mexico, the
Yes.
US, to do it. So that's why the Chicanos become this like figure, right? That it's so easy to attack because those are the people who, first of all, like understand their rights, stand up for themselves, and that's why they mobilize. So I think that's where the government doesn't like that. Any government doesn't like their citizens to be awake
No,
and
pues
fight
no.
for what's best for them. Yeah.
Yes. And I think now, with the platforms that you're seeing being created on social media, the conversation is a little bit more open, because I
Yeah.
remember growing up, it was not okay for you to like be too proud of anything. Like,
Being proud of being brown. Like you
yes,
cannot.
no,
Yeah.
that was not a thing. You had to keep it hush hush, and don't draw attention to yourself, don't draw attention to us. Just and it's funny
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
tell my son all the time, I'm like, I remember elementary, middle school, and high school, and I don't ever feel like I I don't know, maybe because we were exposed to all races and stuff, I didn't feel like there was racism when I
Right.
was
Yeah.
younger.
Yeah.
Except with one teacher. One teacher in middle school really made me feel uncomfortable. She made a lot of people feel uncomfortable. She was white, proud, and very
Yeah.
Republican. And, she would make us feel uncomfortable, pero you better not say nothing. You better not
Mhm.
shush it. You kind of have
Yeah.
to go under the radar. And
Yeah.
I think that's sad because many of us then kind of stayed behind. Like, I learned about Mexican American history in college.
Yeah. That's where history is. I mean, aside of like Cinco de Mayo and like 15 de Septiembre, like
Yes.
no one talked about us. Cesar Chavez, tal vez, but I mean, yeah.
And even then, we didn't even know the full on history. The Cesar
Mhm.
Chavez, Dolores
Yeah.
Huerta. I didn't know Dolores Huerta till I was in college.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh my God, there was a woman leader this whole time?
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also important, right? Like when Obama was running for president, like he borrowed her slogan, right? Like, yes, we can, si se puede.
Yeah.
And even when I asked my students this week, like, who did he borrow this slogan from? And they always think of Cesar Chavez. I'm like, no, there's someone behind him also that helped, and advocate for, los trabajadores, del campo. So I think for me, it's always important to clarify, but it's unfortunate, like you said, we don't exist really in the K through 12 curriculum.
No.
Like our history is, I mean, and you see what's happening in other states too, like, Florida and like all these
Yes.
really conservative, like they're banning books, they're banning this type of curriculum because they understand that there's power in people knowing their history.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge is
Yeah.
power. Um, Ahorita que estabas diciendo, it's so important, I think, for us, that our parents, for those of us that maybe have nieces and nephews, to really know where we come from to be able to teach them who they
Yeah.
are. Because unfortunately, in society right now, it really sucks for me to see so much racism because I'm like, I love to get to know people. You know, I grew up with Samoans, black, white, hondureños, guatemaltecos, you know, colombianos, de todo aquí teníamos, you know, growing up. And it was beautiful, girl. Like, you know, from learning that my Puerto Rican friend, a torta for her was a cake, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
But that was
Yeah.
like super cool. I was like, oh my God, you know, I would call cakes tortas, and
Yeah.
that was cool. I don't know. A mí siempre me gustó eso, you know. And so now to see the state that we're in and that everything is so touchy feely and people are literally judging you. I always thought about, why do people get, why is there racism? Like, is it really just the color of your skin?
Hmm.
Is it really? Like, it can't fit in my, how are we fighting over that?
Yeah. I mean, we fight, and going back to like how should we call ourselves, right? Like there's also debates about that, right? We are no longer just Latinos. Are we Latinos or Hispanics, right? Or like what about the term Latinx or Latine? So again, I think as long as we stand clear on how we want others to call us, I think that's where respect comes into play because we're not gonna agree, right? So the same thing with like Mexican American or Chicano is the same thing, right? As long as, you know, now we ask about pronouns, right? What are your preferred pronouns if you have any, right? So I think it's now understanding that this new generation that's, you know, coming in, they're very more conscious about that, right? Of like, if
Yes.
we're gonna disagree, let's at least, you know, treat each other with dignity. But again, that's not always happening.
No, 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 no. And everything, I always have a strong feeling everything always starts at home. So
Yeah.
también it depends on the education that we're giving our kids, the
Yeah.
example that we're setting for them, because sometimes they can hear our words, but our actions speak louder than our words.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
So, you know, todo eso tiene que ver. So it's very important to be on that. I kind of now want to segue a little bit into the work that you do. Girl, the murals that you have done. I was so upset because I did not know you were in Playas.
Oh yeah, Plaza Tijuana, yeah.
Yes. And I'm like, oh man. I could have met you when you were down there. But the work that you do is so beautiful, girl. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? What are you trying to conquer with these murals and with the stories that you're collecting?
Yeah, so thank you for that first, you know, because I think, you know, like to begin with, like the Plaza Tijuana Mural Project, like all of these projects exist because people are willing to tell their stories, right? And not only to me, but to a group of like researchers that are part of the Humanizing Deportation Project. And this project was born in 2016, in the loom of like Donald Trump becoming president, right? Of like us getting the election results and then traveling to Tijuana to receive, you know, workshops regarding like digital storytelling, which is a method that we use, right, to support in documenting stories so people who had faced deportation, specifically in Tijuana during that time. So this mural comes, you know, to mind during that trip to Tijuana, Plaza Tijuana 2016. Like I grew up, like I mentioned, right, going back and forth between Mexico and the US, but I never had the chance to be a tourist, right? So it's different type of migration or crossing borders, right? Like you go because either your family's leaving you with the grandparents or like something's happening, right? Like you're visiting. But nunca for, you know, leisure or like the things that we can do now. And
Yes.
so Plaza Tijuana was never my radar until I went to that trip. So I was very, very nervous going into this trip because, first of all, like for me, it's like, how do I explain that I haven't been in Mexico for like 10 years? I think around that time, it was close to 10 years.
Wow.
And I think for me, it was just like, I was nervous because I was like, this is, you know, my parents' country and I haven't been here for so long, right? For many reasons. But now going to Plaza Tijuana, like I mentioned to my dad, like, you know, I applied to be a part of this research group and, you know, I was, you know, accepted, you know, and like it was my first semester as a PhD student. And I was like, I didn't know we could do something so important, right? Because again, I was in a very traditional Spanish field, and collecting stories of real people just seemed something that sociologists, anthropologists would do, but
Yes.
not someone in Spanish, right? So I was like, wow, there's power again in like story sharing. So we get to Plaza Tijuana, the whole team, and during this whole stay, I was just like, I think something happened within me being in Tijuana, seeing the border like constantly, and then when I started doing fields work, and I was like, how do I keep telling people what I'm seeing when I was in a way kind of quote unquote forbidden from writing a blog about what I was witnessing? So I turned to photography to document, so instead of having like a written field diary, I would have photos to document these experiences. I still have them, right? And they're actually printed photos. So for me, that became a way of like, how do I make sense of what I'm seeing, right, in person and hearing? And that's where social media became an important aspect of my work, right? Of like not just documenting my personal life, but it was okay, let me take that down and just become like this researcher that is going to tell people what I'm seeing through my own lens and uplifting these voices aside from just the digital stories. And and it didn't feel like enough either way, right? So yes, people would see and like ask me about it, but then I would always come back to the US, right? So we would do our field work. I did field work in Guadalajara and then Tijuana. And then we had a chance to visit Ciudad de Mexico too eventually. So for me, it was just like I could do more. You know what I mean? Like I know how to tell stories because I come from like this legacy of like family that tells stories, right? And we all do, right? It's just a fact that we're willing to sit down and listen, right? To know their truth, their stories. And for me, visiting Plaza Tijuana specifically, there's well, not anymore. Like it's actually being taken down through the new reconstruction of the border fence. But there's this place called Friendship Park, and it's still there. But the murals that existed back in the day are being brought down, right? Are erased from the border. But I feel very thankful and in a sense blessed at the fact that the Plaza Tijuana mural project is the only mural that is left behind, like the one that they didn't touch,
Yeah.
right? So I think that communicates so much behind it. Knowing that the storytellers, because they would message me back in last summer in 2023 asking, do you know if the mural is going to be taken down? Are they going to erase or silence us again? And for me, it was like, I have no answers, right? Because again, this is larger than us and larger than a mural project. But through the mural project, linking it back to that moment, for me, it became a platform, right? To not only use social media or the stories to advocate for who child arrivals are and for their legal return to the US, or to become aware of what that means and to prevent deportations, right? Or just to allow people in Tijuana, honestly, to understand that people who are staying in Tijuana or recent arrivals there, they're not bad people, right? Like they all have a story behind it, which is complex. And we have to like understand that one day we could be in their shoes,
Yes.
right? And I think with the mural project and the collaboration that I had with the storytellers, Enrique Chiu, who helped facilitate the space, and the artist, Mauro Carrera, like all of these people came to play to make something like this happen. But at that time, it was just a mural for the same storytellers. It never was envisioned to be something of like what it became now, right? And so today I'm still talking about it, right? Like doing presentations and or using that as an inspiration to do another mural, but now at El Paso Juarez border. So I think it's just the fact that it's just storytelling, people's stories, regular people's stories, people who were criminalized, the ones that we hardly ever hear about on the news. Those are the ones that I wanted to uplift, right? Because we all deserve some type of visibility and respect. And I think uplifting their stories, even if they can't come back to the US, allows us to see how contemporary migration looks like right now.
Yes. Yes. And I think most of them don't understand, and I'm talking about like my father, he was like, why do you want my story on your podcast? And I'm like,
Yeah.
you don't understand the importance of us knowing what
Yeah.
you guys have been through, what you guys have experienced, because everybody has a different experience. And
Yeah.
so the power of you being validated, right? And as a
Exactly.
father, I was able to understand him a little bit more. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
if you can collect somebody's story and have it forever and then even pass down,
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
you know, it's a beautiful thing to do. And I think the people that are overseen, many, oh, como me molesta when, you know, they're like, oh, another Mexican. And I'm like, we're not all Mexican migrating.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, there's
Mm-hmm.
some from Latin America, and Latin America is humongous, you know, pueden ser
Yeah.
de Perú, de Ecuador, de Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina. You never know. We're not all Mexican, you know, and that
Exactly.
alone shows the ignorance that we have here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even if people like, why do people always think it's Mexicans, right? Again, it's the narrative that we construct, right? But again, I think it's very, very important to highlight the fact that we all have like now, like going back to how we started talking, like the resources to research, right? You don't have to go to college to understand this history. Go on TikTok, look for the videos, right? Make sure that it's like reliable information too. Go on YouTube, like play a podcast, do something to stop being as ignorant as, you know, the most like general idea of like who US Americans are, right? Which they can't even understand the fact that Latin America is so huge, composed of so many countries, and that our interventions there have caused, right, and triggered the migration to the US. So when people ask why the US, I mean, like, well, what have we done, right, to cause this? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Because también it's important for us to take responsibility for our part, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, oh my God, girl, going through school, you know,
Mhm.
learning about Chicano studies, Mexican American studies. How was that? You know, and I mean it in the sense of like I want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because a lot
The
of
whole thing.
people might think, you know, oh, she's a doctor. You just have to go to school so many years. You know, you easy. Or other people could see it as something that's impossible. But I feel
Yeah.
like it's neither. It's
Hmm.
kind of like a balance, and you have to be very passionate. Pero aún así
Hmm.
toma mucho esfuerzo, mucha disciplina. And I just want to hear your experience about it.
Yeah, so I think for me, and you know, when I think about it and reflect about my time at, for example, at Fresno State, right, which I owe so much of my formation and like the way that I think, or like the activism and human rights lens that I have to Fresno State more than UC Davis. And I think for people, it's like, oh my God, how can she say that when it's like a state school versus a UC?
Yeah.
But I think again, it goes back to this fact of like people undervaluing the Central Valley, Fresno, or like thinking of the Central Valley as just a place that you drive through or skip, right?
Yes.
But then forget about like this long and very important history that it has, right? Like the UFW and just so many, many things, right? So I think for me, I'm always proud to say that, right? Of like, I understand that, you know, UC Davis gave me like the final stamp that I needed, right? Which I couldn't get at Fresno State because we don't have a PhD for what I wanted to do. But I think when I started school, I always felt like, you know, like kind of like pushed into knowing more about my history. But there was not a lot of Mexican history classes, literature. Every time I signed up for the literature class, it was at a time where it overlapped with work because I had to work while going to school. So there was no option for me to like be able to like to just go to school. Like I had other commitments, right? So I never learned my history, right? It was just the things that I hear from my dad or movies or like my own research aside of school. But, you know, first of all, entering into college wasn't easy. My counselors in high school were like, why do you even want to apply to the Ivy Leagues? Why do you want to like do these test preps to apply and be eligible or like have like the same like level up the playing field, right? Because again, I come from like a more underrepresented and underserved community as well. So it's just how do I make sure that I'm fit, right, enough to at least have them see my application. But a lot of resistance from the counselors in my high school. And again, there were white counselors. And for me, it was just like, if the people are they're supposed to be here to help me are not helping me, who do I go to?
Yeah.
right? And that's where I started becoming very angry when I was finishing school. So it was junior year, I was taking AP classes, like the most things that you can do, extracurriculars, anything, just to make sure that I was like a good candidate for college. And then I had options to go to USC or to go to Fresno, and I decided for Fresno for family reasons. But I think for me, it's just going in, and I was like, you know what? Regardless of where I'm at, I'm gonna make this the best that I can, right? So again, I think I was very fortunate being in a college where I saw so many people that looked like me, and that we understood each other. Like we never had these talks about imposter syndrome. I never had imposter syndrome at Fresno State, never. I think what I did have was the fact that I wanted more support from my professors, right? Especially the what is she, like a Hispanic, I guess, Hispanic professors who would see my drive and passion of doing so much. And in her case, it was the fact that she said, you're doing too much, that I'm going to lower your grade because you're doing so much. Like you should just be a student. And I was already in a master's. Think about this.
Oh my
And for me,
God.
that was like a wake up call of saying, not everyone who is Hispanic, Latina, woman, a woman who speaks Spanish, right, is going to be an ally to you. That was one of like the most things that for me kind of like allowed me to see it again, right? Like at this incident when I was a little kid, like now someone that, studies the same thing as you do and who I wanted to be my advisor during that time. For me, it was just like, not everyone's going to be an ally to you. And the quicker that you find that out and understand that, the better, right? So for me, that was something that I learned through the punches, right? So my dad always would tell me, like, for a diamond to exist, it has to be like tallado, right? Like you have to go through it. Like you're not gonna become this thing until you go through like all of these scratches and things. I'm like, oh my God, but sometimes, you're just like, what do you do?
No, because we're human, so you're gonna feel it.
Yeah,
I would have been.
you're gonna feel it.
You're gonna be. I would have been feeling like let down because it's like,
Yes, I was.
why aren't you excited for me? Why aren't you guiding me a little bit more when I see myself in you?
Exactly. Or like exactly. So again, going back to this idea of like who are the role models you look up to? And for me, she was one of them. Like I would sit in her classes, I would ask her like, hey, like I'm doing this and that. I want to do like a honors thesis with you. And she's like, okay, come to my class. I would go religiously, I would participate, like again, on top of my regular classes, work, family stuff. But it wasn't enough, right? Again, it wasn't enough. So I was just like, you know what? I dropped her. I didn't care. But when I was planning to apply for PhDs, and I was actually now, applying for PhDs, I saw her and she told me, well, just know that Fresno State does not prepare students for a PhD. So you're not gonna get in. It's totally fine. You keep trying, but I would suggest to look for something else. Oh my God. For me, it was just like, I have so much respect for people. I didn't say anything to her. I was just like, oh, thanks. And just avoided her. Like I avoided her so much. And once I got into UC Davis and I said yes to UC Davis, she started calling me colega and like, she's like, we're gonna be great friends and God knows what. And like, for me, I was just like, I could never be friends with someone like you because when I needed the support, the help to get to this starting point, right? Which just getting in is just something. Staying in the program is a whole nother ordeal. But I think she was one of my biggest teachers in understanding that even in the PhD, I would confront someone just like her, right? And I actually wrote a poem about this person. And, it's called Tell Me Your, what was it? Something about something like being a um, era conquistador or something like that. But I
Oh.
wrote a poem about him in UNAM because I needed to speak up. I never told my advisors or anyone. I did go to the admin at school, but nothing was done about her microaggressions and physical microaggressions in that sense. But I think, again, it's women along the way who are closing these doors for women of color. And again, another profesora también that I wanted to work with closed the door on me. And I was just like, you didn't even give me a chance to like tell you who I was. It was just you saw me first impression, but she was Mexican American. So for me, that was just like it hit harder because the other ones were from Spain, but this one was Mexican American. I was like, como? Like, how do I explain that? to myself, and you understand. X, whatever. So eventually, once I finished my PhD, she came up to me and, recognized my work, right? So again, I think for me, it was just kind of like having these teachers that I didn't choose, but life was like, you need to learn. If you want to stay in this adventure in academia, like you're gonna face so many people that like sharks and people who are always gonna be like thinking of you as less just because of your background, of how you look, how you speak, right? Things like that. Or like the references you make. So I mean, I think for me it's just like knowing that has helped me to just like even now in New York, it's just like, you know what? Like I've gone through so much, like what's next?
Se te resbala, ya. Se te
Yes, I
resbala.
don't pay attention to it.
Yeah,
I don't, like,
and you shouldn't. You shouldn't.
no.
You're not responsible for other people's ignorance. Plain
No,
and
I'm not.
simple. But what was I gonna say? That is just so true. What you just said, and I'm trying to add to it because I think it's a very important topic that doesn't. I don't think we bring it up enough. And that's of how we support one another. I always
We're
say,
so up for each other.
yes, I always say, unidos somos más, and that's the thing, If we were all to get along, girl,
Yeah.
we'd be like France, throwing
Yeah.
crap all over the building, the government buildings.
Exactly.
But of course, they don't want to see us united. There's always tension between, especially in the hoods, I feel like black and Mexican. But if black and Mexican were to get together, girl, ooh, we, oh man, we would
Just
be in
imagine
trouble.
what could happen. Yeah. But
Yes,
there, like, again, there's power in having us, first of all, not in the table, right? Like, not in conversation with like things that will impact our
that is true.
futures, right? Like, there's so much power in like, even if there are Latinos, right, in politics right now, but what are their mindsets, right? And again, I feel for many of them who are there, porque for me, it's just like, damn, for you to get there, first of all, and to stay there, you have to compromise so many values and morals. So I can't criticize them, but I do want them to do better.
Of course, of course,
Yeah,
of
exactly.
course.
So
Y
I'm
tenemos
like,
que apoyar. And I think,
yeah,
the kind of work that you're doing, and that I'm doing is that we're leaving something behind for those that are coming behind us, right? This kind of makes me think about a few weeks ago, or what was it? No, it was a couple months ago. The George Lopez thing, girl.
oh yeah,
And I think most of the mentality is like that, right? Which I 100% agree. I feel like everybody should work for what they have, right? Nobody's giving out handouts. Like nobody comes and just gives you something for free.
yeah,
You have to work for it. However, why am I going to stop somebody else's hustle?
yeah. Like, I mean, right? It's like, and I feel like, I don't know, I think it's just like the mindset again of like how I grew up with my parents. My parents never, like in my mind or memory, talked down on someone else's business. It was more like, oh, I recommend este jardinero. And like, I gave him some of my cards so they could recommend my business and cleaning
Yeah.
carpets, offices. It's always been this idea of collaboration or support.
Yes.
I grew up seeing tarjetas de diferente gente en el carro. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, like cada quien sus cosas. But you're never going to be like, oh, you shouldn't hire this person because, I mean, you're adding so much energy or using energy that you could be using for yourself.
Yeah. Say it louder, girl. Say it louder.
Te digo because I've been in that same on the other end, receiving end, right? Of people kind of like going out of their way to like close doors. But I'm like, close those doors because you doing that is opening otras cosas. You know what I mean? Like windows, I don't know, cualquier cosita, There's
Yeah.
always a broken window somewhere that we could get in through.
Oh, girl, especially us. So, and Chapo taught us about tunnels and stuff. Si no nos dejan por un lado, entramos por otro. But I feel like, kind of highlighting that is very important. Don't ever stop anybody's don't be in anybody's way. I am glad that you learned that early on because it's so true.
Yeah.
I've interviewed girl, I have interviewed Chicanas and I'm like, yes, like like we come from the same barrio, especially when you certain people paint themselves a certain way on social media, right?
Yeah,
And then when
exactly.
you meet them, it's something else. And so,
Uh-huh.
and I'm like, ugh, I won't, ¿cómo se dice? I won't put that interview out there. If I don't feel
Yeah.
chemistry,
No,
and
because at the end of the day, it's also a reflection of you. That's how I
yes,
see it too, right? It's like on TikTok when we repost something, it's like you didn't make that content, but that message reflects you.
mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yes. And so yeah, if the vibe is off and I don't like gatekeepers.
Mm. Oh
Because I
yeah.
feel like todos venimos aquí buscando una oportunidad and if I can help you in any way, then help.
Mm.
And I even hate the saying, el peor enemigo de un mexicano es otro
Oh
mexicano.
yeah. Hmm.
And it's true sometimes. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true, but it doesn't
It's
have
sad
to
porque
be that
también
way.
está, ¿cómo se llama eso? The analogy of the cangrejo, right? Like I grew up with my dad telling me that one too, right? So I think for me, it's like, it's not everyone, of course, right? But it's
No.
always, I think, with social media now, and I think we see on so many TikToks and people make sounds of them, right? Like, who are your real supporters? And I'm thankful to say that besides my own family, like my immediate family, like my parents, my siblings, my two siblings, besides them, it's always people who I meet online who are like, how can I help you? Or people who like we interacted once in person or they know me from something. They're like, I believe in your vision. I believe in you. How can I help you? Like straight up those type of words versus my, well, what I thought was my intimate circle. After I finished my PhD, it was like gone silence. And for me, that was like a huge, like, ¿cómo se puede decir, awakening of saying, damn, like I needed you throughout this whole journey as well, right? Like you need your friends, you need that support. But where are you when you don't need something from me, right? So that's where I think for me, it's like being in New York allows you to understand that it's you, but you and the community that you choose to create. So be selective of who takes up your energy and your time. So for me now, it's like people hit me up like I'm going to New York. I'm like, I don't answer because again, when you had me near you, like a couple steps away, or like estamos en la misma ciudad, like it's ghost town, right? So I think for me, it's like I found people now that deserve my time, or or the work that I'm doing regarding like immigration and deportation. For me, that's where my whole heart is at right now. So I don't have the capacity to like bring in other things. Porque te digo que like people I've trusted, like estas profesoras that I mentioned or that I wanted to like be a part of my life showed me otherwise. So I think for me, I'm more guarded now, but not in the sense of like not letting no one in, but more like being selective. And I think that's where you have the power to choose how you want to react and show up in the world. So that's for me that's helping of
Yeah.
like I need my time and we'll see eventually. Pero I think for me, it's like be true to yourself because if you're lying to yourself, and lying means sustaining friendships or I don't know, like ties that no longer serve you, then you're wasting your time. You're not being true to yourself. And for me, like lying to myself is the worst.
No, pues sí, no, no, no. And it doesn't take you anywhere anyways.
No.
So I know that you have like your website and I know you have like different projects going on. You're also a professor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Oh, wow.
girl, you're doing
I
it
love it.
all. So I really appreciate you, giving me this time. Y nomás quiero dejar saber, is there anywhere else that we can go and find the stories that you're sharing? Do you have like a podcast, a YouTube channel, or anything?
Yeah, so through my website, I decided to just cater everything there, right? To like host it as my digital portfolio, right? Including like the work that I'm doing through like the activism lens or my professor life type of thing, publications or just interviews and things like that. So if people look up like Lizbeth Cruz Santana.com, they'll
Mm-hmm.
be able to access all of these projects, right? So the Humanized Interpretation Project is linked there as well. I'm also a part and co-director of the Leave No One Behind Mural Project, and then
Yes.
also participated as a director of the Documented Dreams Without Borders Digital Storytelling Project, the Plaza Tijuana Mural Project as well, and the upcoming El Paso del Norte Mural Project, which right now has taken up more of my time because I'm so passionate about it, and I'm really excited to make this project happen in Texas, specifically at the border in Juarez y El Paso. And I'm thankful again for like the people who, I mean, I've never seen them in person, and they're like, how can I help you? And they're
Yeah.
the ones connecting me with people and resources. And I think for me, that's just like, it shows you that we all come from different parts of the world, different upbringings, but we have this thing in common. And I think that's where you find your people.
Yes. Yes. And your life will change when you find your people.
Oh yeah, you feel lighter, happier, and like, you don't know, it's much better. Yeah.
Yes, yes, because you want people that are motivating you, that are cheering for you, that are calling you out
Yeah,
respectfully,
también.
respectfully,
Exactly. Yes.
um, and that they're there cuando necesitas, you know, and vice versa, you as well for them, because it's not a one-way street. You have to have
No,
a
yeah.
two-way street. So, no, definitely. Lizbeth, no, I really like you. I like you a lot. I
Oh,
love
thank
what you're
you.
doing. I mean, I know I have nothing to do with how you grew up, but I feel so proud of you as a Latina. Te felicito. The fact that you can call yourself doctora.
I know it's still something that I'm like, okay, let me pick up
Yeah.
those two little words at the beginning. Yeah.
Yes. So, you know, and it's pretty cool because I don't know if you know, do you know Carlis de la Cruz?
Oh yeah, yeah. Hmm.
She's also a lawyer. So the de la Cruz name is up there, girl.
Yeah, the last name. Yeah.
You guys are giving it such good names. Or, ¿cómo se dice good?
Like more visibility, because growing up, I mean, besides my name, De La Cruz was hardly ever like in the class roster. So for me, it was just like, oh, like another De La Cruz somewhere.
Yes, yes. Pero sí, I thank you so much for coming. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please go and follow her. If you guys are watching us, it'll be on the screen. If you're just hearing us, go to the description box and I'll have her links there. Thank you so much for joining us,
Oh, thank you so
Lisbeth.
much for the space, también. Yeah, and we'll stay
Cuídate.
in touch.
Yes, yes. You better come back after you finish the El Paso one. I want to see
Oh
that one.
yeah. Sí, sí. Gracias.
All right, girlie, bye. I want to hear your story or I want to support your small business. To do so, please go ahead and visit embracingmymarkings.com. Thank you for tuning in.